When most people look up at the Empire State Building, they see an icon. They see King Kong clinging to its spire. They see a limestone tower piercing the Manhattan skyline. They see the ultimate symbol of American ambition reaching toward the clouds. But almost no one remembers what stood there before. Almost no one knows that beneath the cold shadow of that famous skyscraper lies the ghost of something far more human, far more beautiful, and far more tragic. Where the Empire State Building now rises 1,154 feet into the air, there once stood the most magnificent hotel America had ever seen. A palace of marble and mahogany, of crystal chandeliers and velvet curtains, of champagne and secrets. It was called the Waldorf Astoria. And in 1929, at the height of its fame, at the peak of its power, it was torn down, demolished, erased. Not because it had failed, but because the land beneath it was worth more than the legend built upon it. This is the story of that hotel, a story of family hatred that built twin palaces side by side, a story of Gilded Age excess that invented modern luxury, a story of a man who died on the Titanic, leaving his monument behind, and ultimately, a story of how New York devours even its most beloved landmarks without hesitation, without mercy, and without looking back. The original Waldorf Astoria operated for only 36 years. But in that brief window, it became the beating heart of American high society, the birthplace of iconic dishes, and the standard by which all hotels would be measured. And then, in a matter of months, it vanished. What remains today is only memory, photographs, and the cold steel tower that rose in its place. A tower that, ironically, stood half empty for years, mocked as the empty state building while the nation sank into the Great Depression. This is not a story about progress. This is a story about loss. In the late 1800s, Manhattan was a city of transformation and contradiction. Millionaires built marble mansions along Fifth Avenue, while immigrants crowded into tenements only blocks away. Horse-drawn carriages rattled over cobblestone streets as the first electric lights flickered in the windows of the wealthy. The air smelled of coal smoke, fresh bread, and ambition. It was the Gilded Age, a time when fortunes were made overnight and lost just as quickly, when industrial barons lived like kings and the working class toiled in shadows. Society was divided not just by wealth, but by bloodlines, breeding, and the unspoken rules that governed who belonged and who did not. At the top of this glittering, ruthless pyramid sat the Astor family. The Astors were American royalty. Their fortune began with John Jacob Astor, a German immigrant who arrived in New York with little more than determination and a talent for making money. He built an empire through fur trading, real estate, and an almost supernatural ability to predict where the city would grow next. By the time of his death in 1848, he was the richest man in America. His descendants inherited not only his wealth, but also his position at the very center of New York society. To be an Astor was to be untouchable. To be invited to an Astor event was to be acknowledged as someone who mattered. But even among royalty, there are feuds. And the feud that would create the Waldorf Astoria was as bitter as it was petty, as personal as it was public. It began with two cousins who despised each other, William Waldorf Astor and John Jacob Astor IV. William Waldorf Astor was the eldest son of the eldest son, which meant he believed the family legacy belonged to him by birthright. He was serious, intellectual, and deeply proud. He served as a diplomat, wrote novels, and invested in newspapers. But more than anything, he craved respect. He wanted to be seen as more than just a rich man's heir. He wanted to be recognized as a leader, a statesman, a man of substance. Unfortunately for William, American society didn't see him that way. They saw him as cold, arrogant, and disconnected. His political ambitions fizzled. His literary work was largely ignored. And worst of all, he lived in the shadow of his aunt, Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, better known as the Mrs. Astor. Mrs. Astor was the undisputed queen of New York society. She didn't need to raise her voice to command a room. Her approval could make a career, her disapproval could ruin a reputation. She famously declared that there were only 400 people in New York worth knowing, the exact number that could fit into her ballroom. If you weren't part of Mrs. Astor's 400, you simply didn't exist in the eyes of high society. And she made it very clear that William Waldorf was not her favorite nephew. She preferred his cousin, John Jacob Astor IV, the son of her husband's brother. John Jacob Astor IV was everything William was not. Handsome, charming, and adventurous, he was an inventor, a soldier, and a novelist. He built mechanical devices, wrote science fiction, and later served in the Spanish-American War. He was also scandalously bold in his personal life. Where William followed rules and traditions, John Jacob pushed boundaries. Society loved him for it. Mrs. Astor loved him for it. And William resented him for it. The tension between the two cousins simmered for years. They lived next to each other on Fifth Avenue, their mansions standing side by side between 33rd and 34th Streets. William's home sat on the corner of 33rd Street. John Jacob's mother, the formidable Mrs. Astor, lived in the mansion directly to the north. The proximity made the rivalry impossible to ignore. Every dinner party, every social event, every rumor and whisper reminded William that he would never be the favored son, never be the true heir to the family's social throne. In 1890, William made a decision that would change New York forever. If he couldn't win the respect he craved in America, he would leave. He moved to England, renounced his American citizenship, and eventually bought a British title, becoming the first Viscount Astor. But before he left, he did something calculated, something vengeful, something that would force his family to remember him. He announced that he was tearing down his Fifth Avenue mansion and building a hotel in its place. Not just any hotel, a grand, luxurious, world-class hotel that would bear his middle name, the Waldorf. The announcement sent shockwaves through New York society. Hotels were commercial establishments, places where travelers stayed temporarily. They were not supposed to exist on Fifth Avenue, the most exclusive residential street in America. Building a hotel there was an insult, a disruption, an act of social vandalism. And that was exactly the point. William wanted to force his aunt, Mrs. Astor, to live next door to a hotel. He wanted to turn her elegant, quiet neighborhood into a place of noise, crowds, and strangers. He wanted to make her uncomfortable. And it worked. Mrs. Astor was furious. She refused to accept the indignity of living beside a hotel. So, in 1893, she did what any self-respecting member of the 400 would do. She moved. She relocated further uptown to a new mansion on 65th Street and Fifth Avenue, leaving her old home behind. And then her son, John Jacob Astor IV, made his own announcement. He would tear down his mother's mansion and build an even grander hotel right next to William's. He would call it the Astoria. What had begun as a family feud was about to become the most famous hotel in the world. William Waldorf Astor hired the architect, Henry Janeway Hardenberg, to design his hotel. Hardenberg was already famous for designing the Dakota, the massive apartment buildings on the Upper West Side that looked like a French Renaissance chateau. For the Waldorf, he envisioned something equally grand but distinctly American, a building that combined European elegance with New York confidence. The Waldorf Hotel opened its doors on March 13, 1893. It stood 13 stories tall, a giant for its time, built of limestone and brick with a facade that exuded wealth and permanence. The entrance was marked by a grand porte cochere where carriages could pull up and deposit guests beneath a sheltered archway. Inside, the lobby stretched like a cathedral, filled with marble columns, gilded moldings, and elaborate frescoes painted on the ceilings. Crystal chandeliers hung from above, their light reflecting off polished floors and mirrored walls. Every surface gleamed, every detail whispered luxury. But the Waldorf wasn't just beautiful, it was revolutionary. Unlike the older hotels of the era, which were often drafty, dimly lit, and uncomfortable, the Waldorf offered modern conveniences that seemed almost magical. Every room had electric lighting, a luxury most homes didn't yet possess. There was a telephone switchboard that connected guests to the outside world. Private bathrooms were available in many suites, an extraordinary feature at a time when most people still shared communal facilities. The hotel also featured one of the first electric elevators in New York, allowing guests to glide smoothly from floor to floor without the jerking, dangerous climb of older steam-powered lifts. The public spaces were designed to impress. There was the Empire Room, a massive ballroom where society matrons held their grandest events. The Waldorf Cafe, which became the hotel's most famous space, was a place where gentlemen gathered to smoke cigars, sip brandy, and conduct business in an atmosphere of dark wood paneling and leather chairs. The restaurant, managed by the legendary maître d'hôtel Oscar Tschirky, better known as Oscar of the Waldorf, set a new standard for fine dining in America. Oscar invented dishes that would become classics, including the Waldorf salad, a simple but elegant combination of apples, celery, and mayonnaise that became a symbol of refined taste. The Waldorf was an instant success. Within weeks of opening, it became the place to see and be seen. Wealthy New Yorkers flocked to its restaurants and ballrooms. Out-of-town visitors stayed in its luxurious suites. Businessmen negotiated deals in its smoking rooms. Politicians held private meetings in its parlors. The hotel became a stage, and everyone who entered became part of the performance. But William Waldorf Astor never saw his creation reach its full glory. By the time the hotel opened, he was already living in England, focused on his new life abroad. He had made his point, built his monument, and moved on. The Waldorf belonged to New York now, not to him. Meanwhile, John Jacob Astor Forfus was preparing to make his own statement. He hired the same architect, Henry Hardenberg, and instructed him to build a hotel even larger and more opulent than the Waldorf. Construction began almost immediately on the site of Mrs. Astor's former mansion. The Astoria Hotel opened on November 1st, 1897, just 4 years after the Waldorf. The Astoria was everything John Jacob had promised. It was 17 stories tall, 4 stories higher than the Waldorf. Its facade matched the Waldorf's design, creating a visual unity between the two buildings that made them appear as one continuous structure. Inside, the Astoria offered even more grandeur, larger ballrooms, more elaborate dining rooms, and suites decorated with silk wallpaper, mahogany furniture, and Persian rugs. The Astor Gallery, a long corridor filled with paintings and sculptures, became one of the most photographed spaces in the city. But the true genius of the Astoria was its connection to the Waldorf. The two hotels were joined by a 300-foot corridor known as Peacock Alley, a name that perfectly captured its purpose. Peacock Alley was where society's elite paraded in their finest clothes, where women showed off the latest Paris fashions, and where men displayed their wealth and status. Walking through Peacock Alley wasn't just about getting from one hotel to the other. It was about being seen. It was theater. It was spectacle. It was the heartbeat of New York society. With the two hotels now connected, they operated as a single entity. Together, they became known as the Waldorf Astoria, written with a hyphen to signify their union. The combined hotel was the largest in the world, boasting over 1,000 rooms, a dozen restaurants and ballrooms, and a staff of more than 1,500 employees. It occupied an entire city block from 33rd to 34th Street along 5th Avenue, a massive palace of limestone and marble that dominated the skyline. The Waldorf Astoria wasn't just a hotel, it was a city within a city, a self-contained world of luxury and excess. The irony, of course, was that the hotel born from a family feud became the ultimate symbol of unity and grandeur. The two cousins who hated each other had accidentally created something far greater than either of them could have imagined. The Waldorf Astoria stood as proof that even bitterness and rivalry could produce beauty. For the next 3 decades, the Waldorf Astoria reigned as the center of American high society. Presidents stayed there, ambassadors negotiated there, titans of industry dined there, actors, singers, and writers mingled in its lobbies. The hotel witnessed engagements, scandals, political deals, and historic moments. It was where the city's power brokers gathered, where fortunes were made and lost over dinner, and where the future of America was quietly decided in wood-paneled rooms filled with cigar smoke and whispered conversations. To understand the true power of the Waldorf Astoria, you have to understand what it meant to walk through its doors. The hotel wasn't merely a place to sleep. It was a stage, a proving ground, a temple where the rituals of American aristocracy were performed daily. When you arrived at the entrance, your carriage or automobile was met by doormen in impeccable uniforms, men who could identify returning guests by sight and greet them by name. This wasn't accident, it was training. The hotel maintained detailed files on every guest, noting their preferences, their habits, their peculiarities. Did Mr. Vanderbilt prefer his morning paper with breakfast, or delivered to his room before dawn? Did Mrs. Whitney take tea at 4 o'clock exactly? The staff knew. The staff always knew. Inside the lobby, bellhops moved with practiced efficiency, carrying leather trunks and hat boxes up to suites that cost more per night than most families earned in a month. The marble floors gleamed under, constant polishing. The air carried the subtle scent of fresh flowers, orchids, roses, lilies, arranged in massive displays that were replaced daily. Everything was designed to communicate one message. Here, nothing was too good, nothing was too much, and nothing was impossible. The hotel employed over 1,500 people, an army of workers whose sole purpose was to maintain an illusion of effortless perfection. There were chambermaids who turned down beds and left chocolates on pillows. There were valets who pressed suits and polished shoes to mirror finishes. There were telephone operators who connected calls with quiet efficiency. There were engineers who kept the boilers running, the elevators moving, and the electric lights glowing. And above them all stood the management, led by George Bolt, the Swiss immigrant who became the hotel's legendary manager and who understood better than anyone that a great hotel was not just about luxury. It was about anticipation, about knowing what guests wanted before they knew it themselves. The hotel's influence extended far beyond New York. It set the standard for luxury hospitality around the world. Other cities built grand hotels inspired by the Waldorf Astoria's design. Hoteliers studied its operations, copied its menu, and tried to replicate its elegance. Oscar of the Waldorf became the most famous maitre d' in the world, and his dishes, Waldorf salad, eggs Benedict, Thousand Island dressing, became permanent fixtures on American menus. But Oscar's true genius wasn't in creating recipes. It was in understanding power. He knew that a table assignment could make or break a reputation, that being seated in the center of the dining room was a declaration of importance, while a table near the kitchen was a subtle insult. He cultivated relationships with the city's elite, remembering their favorite wines, their preferred dishes, their social enemies. He knew who was feuding with whom, who was courting whom, and who needed to be kept apart at all costs. The dining room was his kingdom, and he ruled it with the precision of a chess master. The hotel's restaurants became legendary destinations in their own right. The Palm Room featured a retractable glass ceiling that opened on warm evenings, allowing diners to eat beneath the stars while surrounded by potted palm trees and the soft music of a string orchestra. The Empire Room hosted elaborate banquets where 10-course meals were served on china edged with gold, where champagne flowed freely, and where the wealthy celebrated their wealth with unabashed extravagance. And then there was the Men's Cafe, a dark-paneled sanctuary where women were forbidden and where the real business of the city was conducted. Here, over cigars and brandy, deals were struck that would shape industries. Railroad tycoons negotiated routes. Bankers discussed mergers. Politicians made promises. The Men's Cafe was where the public performance of wealth gave way to the private reality of power. It was whispered that more money changed hands in that room than in any bank in the city. But beneath the glittering surface, the Waldorf Astoria carried shadows. It was a place of carefully maintained appearances, where wealth masked insecurity, where smiles hid cruelty, and where the rules of society were enforced with ruthless precision. The hotel may have been open to anyone who could afford a room, but its social spaces were strictly controlled. The ballrooms belonged to the 400. The dining rooms were monitored by Oscar, who decided who sat where. Peacock Alley was a runway for the elite, and anyone who didn't belong was made to feel it. The staff, for all their training and discretion, saw everything. They saw which men arrived with wives and which arrived with younger women who were decidedly not their wives. They saw businessmen celebrating deals while their competitors plotted in adjacent rooms. They saw politicians accepting envelopes thick with cash. They saw society matrons who smiled in public but spoke viciously about each other in private. The hotel's corridors buzzed with gossip, carefully controlled and selectively shared, because information was currency in a place where everyone had something to hide. And then there were the secrets. Every grand hotel has them. The affairs conducted in private suites, the business deals made behind closed doors, the scandals carefully hidden from the press. The Waldorf Astoria was no different. It was a place where men brought mistresses, where marriages crumbled, where fortunes were gambled away, and where reputations were destroyed. The hotel's thick walls and discreet staff ensured that what happened inside stayed inside. There were whispered stories that would never make the newspapers. The socialite who overdosed on laudanum in her suite and whose death was quietly ruled a heart attack. The financier who lost everything at the hotel's illegal card tables and jumped from a window on the 12th floor. The married senator found in a compromising position with a chorus girl, an incident that was resolved with money and threats and the timely intervention of the hotel's management. These stories circulated among the staff, passed from chambermaid to bellhop to kitchen worker, never written down, never confirmed, but always remembered. The hotel also bore witness to genuine tragedy beyond scandal. During the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, several guests died in their rooms, their bodies removed quietly to avoid panic. The hotel's staff worked through the crisis, many falling ill themselves, some never recovering. The chandelier-lit ballrooms that had hosted celebrations were temporarily converted into makeshift infirmaries. The hotel that had symbolized invincibility revealed itself to be as vulnerable as any other place when death came calling. Yet even tragedy couldn't diminish the hotel's mystique. If anything, it added to the layers of history that accumulated within its walls. Every room held stories. Every corridor echoed with the ghosts of past conversations. The hotel became a repository of memory, a place where the past and present existed simultaneously, where you could walk the same halls that had been walked by presidents and criminals, saints and sinners, lovers and enemies. But no amount of discretion could protect the hotel from the tragedy that would mark its history forever. In the early years of the 20th century, John Jacob Astor IV remained one of the hotel's most prominent figures. Though he spent much of his time traveling, inventing, and pursuing various business ventures, he always returned to the Waldorf Astoria. It was his creation, his legacy, and a symbol of his place in the world. In 1909, at the age of 47, John Jacob shocked New York society by divorcing his wife, Ava Lowell Willing. Divorce was scandalous enough, but what followed was even worse. He soon began courting Madeleine Talmadge Force, the 18-year-old daughter of a respectable Brooklyn family. The age difference, nearly 30 years, caused an uproar. Society matrons whispered. Newspapers published scathing editorials. Even his own family expressed disapproval. But John Jacob didn't care. In 1911, he married Madeleine in a quiet ceremony. To escape the gossip and judgment, the couple left New York and embarked on an extended honeymoon abroad, traveling through Europe and Egypt. By early 1912, Madeleine was pregnant, and the couple decided it was time to return home. They booked passage on the newest, most luxurious ocean liner in the world, a ship that promised speed, comfort, and absolute safety. It was called the RMS Titanic. On the night of April 14, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The ship that was supposed to be unsinkable began to sink. Chaos erupted. Lifeboats were lowered. Women and children were prioritized. John Jacob Astor IV helped his pregnant wife into Lifeboat 4, then stepped back onto the deck. He was last seen standing calmly near the bridge, smoking a cigarette and watching the lifeboats descend into the dark water. He knew he was going to die, and he faced it with the same calm confidence he had shown throughout his life. His body was recovered days later, identified by the initials sewn into his jacket and the significant amount of money found in his pockets. John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in the world, co-creator of the Waldorf Astoria, died at the age of 47. His death became one of the most famous casualties of the Titanic disaster, a tragedy that symbolized the end of an era. Back in New York, the news sent shockwaves through the city. The Waldorf Astoria, which John Jacob had helped build, became a place of mourning. Flags flew at half-mast. Memorial services were held. Guests walked through Peacock Alley in silence, remembering the man who had made the hotel possible. For many, his death felt like an omen, a sign that the Gilded Age, with all its excess, confidence, and belief in progress, was coming to an end. And in many ways, it was. The years following John Jacob Astor IV's death were marked by change and uncertainty. World War I erupted in 1914, bringing an end to the carefree opulence of the pre-war years. Young men who had danced in the Waldorf Astoria's ballrooms now fought in the trenches of Europe. The hotel itself transformed during the war, hosting military events, fundraising galas, and somber gatherings for families who had lost sons overseas. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to solemnity. After the war, the 1920s brought a new kind of energy to New York. The city roared with jazz music, speakeasies, flappers, and a frenetic sense of freedom. But this new world didn't quite fit the Waldorf Astoria's old elegance. The hotel still attracted wealthy guests, but it no longer felt like the center of the universe. Younger, more modern hotels were being built. The social rules that had governed the 400 were loosening. The world was changing, and the Waldorf Astoria, for all its grandeur, was beginning to feel like a relic of a bygone era. But the hotel was still profitable. It was still famous. It was still beloved. And if not for one simple fact, the extraordinary value of the land it sat on, it might have stood for decades more. By the mid-1920s, Manhattan real estate had become the most valuable in the world. Fifth Avenue was no longer a quiet residential street. It was now the heart of commerce, lined with department stores, office buildings, and the headquarters of major corporations. The old mansions that had once defined the avenue were being torn down one by one, replaced by towering skyscrapers. Land that had been worth thousands per square foot in the 1890s was now worth millions. The Waldorf Astoria sat on one of the most valuable plots in the city, an entire block of Fifth Avenue between 33rd and 34th Streets. To developers and real estate investors, the hotel was no longer a landmark. It was an inefficient use of space. It was a low building on high-value land. It was, quite simply, in the way. In 1928, the Astor family made a decision that would erase the hotel forever. They sold the land. The buyer was a group of investors led by John J. Raskob, a former executive at General Motors and DuPont, and Coleman DuPont, an industrialist with a vision for the tallest building in the world. Their plan was audacious: demolish the Waldorf Astoria and construct a skyscraper so tall, so iconic, that it would define the Manhattan skyline for generations. They would call it the Empire State Building. The announcement came as a shock. For many New Yorkers, the idea of tearing down the Waldorf Astoria felt almost sacrilegious. This wasn't just a hotel, it was a piece of the city's soul. It was where history had happened. It was where memories had been made. It was irreplaceable, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills. And in New York, nothing is sacred when money is involved. On May 3, 1929, the Waldorf Astoria closed its doors for the final time. A farewell dinner was held in the ballroom, attended by former guests, employees, and city officials. Speeches were made, toasts were raised, tears were shed. Oscar of the Waldorf, now an old man, stood in the dining room he had ruled for decades and said his goodbyes. The chandeliers glowed one last time. The orchestra played one final song, and then, in the early hours of the morning, the lights went dark. The farewell was bittersweet, tinged with nostalgia and regret. Former guests stood in Peacock Alley for the last time, remembering the countless times they had walked its length, dressed in their finest, performing for an audience of their peers. They touched the marble columns, ran their hands along the polished wood railings, and tried to memorize details they knew would soon be lost forever. Older employees wept openly. Many had worked at the hotel for decades, some since the day it opened. The Waldorf Astoria wasn't just their workplace. It was their identity, their home, the center of their lives. Newspaper reporters filled the hotel that final night, interviewing guests and capturing the melancholy atmosphere. The New York Times wrote that the closing felt like the end of an epoch, noting that the hotel had been more than a building. It was an institution, a symbol, a piece of living history. Other papers published photographs of the hotel's most famous spaces, preserving them in print for future generations who would never see them in person. Some guests pocketed small souvenirs, matchbooks, menus, pieces of stationery embossed with the hotel's crest. These items, worthless in themselves, would become treasured keepsakes, physical reminders of a place that had meant something profound. Years later, they would be found in attic trunks and estate sales, small fragments of a vanished world. The demolition began almost immediately. Wrecking crews moved in with sledgehammers, crowbars, and dynamite. Unlike today, when historic buildings are sometimes carefully deconstructed with their materials salvaged and repurposed, the destruction of the Waldorf Astoria was brutal and efficient. There was no sentiment, no reverence for the beauty being destroyed. This was business. The faster the hotel came down, the faster construction could begin on the Empire State Building. Time was money, and money was all that mattered. Within days, the grand entrance was reduced to rubble. The porte cochere, where carriages had once deposited wealthy guests, was smashed into fragments. Within weeks, the marble columns that had supported the lobby ceiling were toppled, their carved capitals cracked and broken. Within months, the entire structure was gone. The Waldorf Astoria, which had taken years to build and decades to perfect, was erased in a matter of months. Photographs from the demolition show scenes of almost apocalyptic destruction. In one image, workers stand amid a landscape of shattered marble and twisted metal, the ornate details of the hotel's interior reduced to unrecognizable debris. In another, a chandelier lies broken on the ground, its crystals scattered like diamonds in the dust. In yet another, a portion of the facade still stands, its windows dark and empty, while the rest of the building has been reduced to nothing but rubble piles. The workers who demolished the hotel were mostly recent immigrants, Italians, Irish, Poles, men who had come to America seeking opportunity and who now found themselves tearing down the very symbol of American success. They worked in clouds of dust, breathing in the powdered remains of plaster and marble. They swung sledgehammers against walls that had once echoed with laughter and music. They loaded debris into trucks bound for landfills, where the fragments of the Waldorf Astoria would be buried and forgotten. Some of the hotel's fixtures were sold at auction. The massive chandeliers, the ornate mirrors, the hand-carved wooden paneling, all were offered to the highest bidder. Some were purchased by other hotels, hoping to capture a piece of the Waldorf Astoria's magic. Others went to wealthy collectors who wanted to install them in their private homes. But most of the hotel's contents were simply destroyed. The cost of removing and storing the fixtures exceeded their resale value. It was cheaper to smash them than to save them. The site became a massive crater, a wound in the Manhattan landscape. Steel workers arrived and began building the Empire State Building's foundation, driving steel beams deep into the bedrock where the hotel had once stood. The construction was a marvel of speed and efficiency. The Empire State Building rose at a rate of 4.5 stories per week, a pace that seemed almost impossible. Workers competed to set records, racing to complete the structure faster than anyone thought possible. But the speed came at a cost. 5 workers died during construction, falling from scaffolding or crushed by falling materials. Their deaths barely made the newspapers. They were anonymous men, their names forgotten, their sacrifices unremembered. The city was focused on the triumph of the new building, not the human cost of its creation. The timing of the demolition was cruelly ironic. The Waldorf Astoria closed in May 1929. In October 1929, the stock market crashed, plunging the United States into the Great Depression. Suddenly, the optimism that had fueled the Empire State Building's construction evaporated. Businesses failed, fortunes disappeared, unemployment soared, and the new skyscraper, completed in 1931, stood half-empty for years. Its office spaces remained vacant. Its retail floors attracted few tenants. It became known derisively as the Empty State Building, a hollow monument to a dream that had turned into a nightmare. The irony was not lost on New Yorkers. The Waldorf Astoria had been demolished because the land was supposedly too valuable to waste on a hotel. But now, that same land supported a building that couldn't find tenants, that generated little revenue, that stood as a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes could turn. The hotel, which had been profitable until its final day, had been sacrificed for a skyscraper that became a financial disaster. Meanwhile, the Waldorf Astoria itself was not entirely gone. Recognizing the public's attachment to the name and hoping to capitalize on the brand's reputation, the hotel's operators announced that a new Waldorf Astoria would be built further uptown, on Park Avenue between 49th and 50th Streets. This new hotel, designed in the Art Deco style that was becoming fashionable, opened in 1931. It was grand, modern, and luxurious, boasting 2,000 rooms and every modern convenience. But it was not the same. The new Waldorf Astoria lacked the history, the soul, the accumulated memories that had made the original so special. It was a hotel, and a fine one, but it was not the hotel. Guests who had known the original walked through the new building and felt the difference immediately. The architecture was sleeker, but less intimate. The spaces were larger, but less personal. The new hotel could be admired, but it could not be loved the way the original had been loved. Old employees who found work at the new location often spoke wistfully about the original. They remembered specific rooms, specific guests, specific moments that could never be recreated. The new Waldorf Astoria became successful in its own right, hosting presidents and celebrities and continuing the tradition of luxury hospitality. But it lived in the shadow of its predecessor, forever compared to something that no longer existed except in memory. And the original, the real Waldorf Astoria, the one born from a family feud, the one that had hosted presidents and millionaires, the one where John Jacob Astor IV had walked before boarding the Titanic, was gone forever. Today, if you stand on the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street, you can look up at the Empire State Building and try to imagine what once stood there. You can picture the grand entrance, the marble lobby, the glittering chandeliers. You can imagine Oscar of the Waldorf greeting guests. You can picture John Jacob Astor IV standing in Peacock Alley, confident and proud. You can hear the laughter, the music, the clink of champagne glasses. But all of that exists only in memory now. The physical structure is gone. The rooms where deals were made, the ballrooms where debutantes danced, the suites where secrets were whispered, all of it was reduced to rubble and carted away. What remains are photographs, faded and sepia-toned, showing a world that feels impossibly distant. There are menus, carefully preserved in archives, listing dishes that no longer exist. There are newspaper articles, breathless and admiring, describing a hotel that seemed too magnificent to ever disappear. And there are stories passed down through families, through hotel employees, through historians who refuse to let the past be forgotten. Stories of elegance and excess, of beauty and betrayal, of a time when New York was both more glamorous and more ruthless than it is today. The tragedy of the original Waldorf Astoria is not just that it was destroyed. The tragedy is that it was destroyed at the height of its fame, demolished not because it had failed, but because it had succeeded too well. The land beneath it had become too valuable. The city had grown too hungry. And so, the hotel was sacrificed on the altar of progress, a victim of the very success it had helped create. The story of the Waldorf Astoria is, in many ways, the story of New York itself, a city that builds monuments and then tears them down, a city that values the future more than the past, a city that never stops moving, never stops changing, never stops devouring its own history. The hotel that William Waldorf Astor built out of spite, and John Jacob Astor IV expanded out of pride, became a symbol of an era. And when that era ended, the hotel ended with it. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of the story is this. The Empire State Building, the structure that replaced the Waldorf Astoria, became one of the most beloved landmarks in the world. It is adored, photographed, and celebrated. Tourists travel from across the globe to visit it. It appears in countless films, songs, and works of art. It has become synonymous with New York, with ambition, with the American dream. And yet, almost no one remembers what it destroyed. The Waldorf Astoria's legacy, however, endures in unexpected ways. The new hotel on Park Avenue continues to operate, hosting world leaders, celebrities, and dignitaries. The name still carries weight, still suggests luxury and sophistication. The dishes invented by Oscar of the Waldorf salad, eggs, Benedict, remain staples of American cuisine. The standards the hotel set for service, elegance, and hospitality influenced every luxury hotel that came after it. But more than that, the original Waldorf Astoria lives on as a reminder of what we lose when we prioritize profit over preservation, when we choose the new over the historic, when we let the wrecking ball swing without asking what we are destroying. The hotel's story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What do we owe to the past? What should be saved? And what should be allowed to disappear? And when we erase history to build the future, what part of ourselves do we lose in the process? The original Waldorf Astoria was a product of its time, a time of extraordinary wealth, rigid social hierarchies, and unapologetic excess. It was built by two men who hated each other, and yet it became a place where people came together. It was a monument to vanity, and yet it created genuine beauty. It was exclusive and elitist, and yet it set standards that democratized luxury, making fine dining and elegant hospitality something that could be experienced, imitated, and aspired to. The hotel's destruction in 1929 marked the end of an era, but it also marked the beginning of a new one. The Empire State Building that replaced it symbolized a different kind of ambition, not the intimate grandeur of a private palace, but the soaring, impersonal ambition of corporate America. The shift from the Waldorf Astoria to the Empire State Building was the shift from the Gilded Age to the modern age, from a world defined by families and bloodlines to a world defined by business and technology. And in that shift, something was lost, something irreplaceable. The story of the Waldorf Astoria teaches us that even the most magnificent creations are temporary. Even the grandest monuments can be erased. Even the most beloved landmarks are vulnerable. In a city like New York, nothing lasts forever. Buildings rise and fall, neighborhoods transform. History is written and rewritten and written again. But the story also teaches us that memory is powerful. Even though the original Waldorf Astoria is gone, it is not forgotten. Its name lives on. Its influence endures. Its story continues to be told, passed down through generations, preserved in archives, remembered by those who care about the past. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all, that the things we build are less important than the stories we tell about them. That a hotel can be demolished, but the memory of what it represented cannot be. That progress is inevitable, but loss is real. And that sometimes the most tragic stories are the ones that force us to remember what we would rather forget. The original Waldorf Astoria stood for 36 years. In the grand sweep of history, that is barely a moment. And yet, in that brief moment, it changed the world. It set a standard. It created a legend. It built a stage where history happened. And then, one day, it was gone. Torn down to make room for something taller, something newer, something that would cast a longer shadow. The Empire State Building rose from the rubble, a monument to ambition and progress. But beneath its foundation, buried under steel and concrete and the weight of decades, lies the ghost of the Waldorf Astoria, a palace of marble and memory, a legend erased by the very city that created it. Today, when you stand at the base of the Empire State Building and look up at its towering height, remember this: you are standing on hallowed ground. You are standing where society once gathered, where Oscar once served his famous salad, where John Jacob Astor IV once walked before, boarding a doomed ship. You are standing on a grave that holds not just a building, but an entire world. The Waldorf Astoria is gone, but its story remains. And as long as someone tells that story, as long as someone remembers what stood there before the skyscraper, the hotel will never truly die. It will live on in the cracks between the city's stones, in the whispers of history, and in the hearts of those who understand that sometimes the things we lose are more important than the things we build. This is the tragic story of the hotel erased by the Empire State Building, a story of ambition and arrogance, of beauty and bitterness, of a family feud that created a monument, and of a city that destroyed that monument without a second thought. It is a story of the Gilded Age, of the Titanic, of the Great Depression, and of the cold mathematics of real estate that values land over legacy. It is a story of loss, and loss, unlike the buildings we tear down, lasts forever.